is everywhere right now, but most leaders are still asking a very basic question. What does this actually mean for my business? In this conversation today, we are stepping away from tools and trends to look at the real business implications of AI, how value is created, where leaders tend to overestimate impact, and what's genuinely different about this moment compared to past technology waves. This isn't about future predictions, it's about the decisions leaders are making right now, often without realizing how fundamentally the rules are shifting. And to help us unpack this, I'm joined today by Shujaat Ahmad, someone who spent his career at the intersection of business strategy, technology, and people. And he's worked inside complex global organizations, advised leaders through major transformations, and brings a very grounded and human centered lens to how AI is reshaping work. Shujat, welcome to Tides.
Well, thank you, Shveta, for having me here. Excited to be here and talk about this.
Absolutely. I mean, even before we started recording the podcast, you and I had such an engaging and interesting conversation. And I learned so much about you from your lived experiences, having worked and applied your skills in different parts of the business. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And maybe we can get started by, like painting a picture of how AI truly reshaping how businesses are done. Because more often than not, when we talk about AI, we either jump to the technology side of AI or we get into the human impact of AI. But today I wanted us to kind of tease out and explore how big the impact is of AI on the business and how value is created. So I'd love to hear from you. What are you seeing and sensing?
Absolutely. And I love we're starting with business because, the all the narrative that we hear around us in the news is around two parts, right? One is around, hey, it's going to impact jobs, it's already taking jobs away. And secondly, if people are not adopting AI enough, right? So you see reports from whether McKinsey, BCG, from education institutes like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, but very little that is being talked about that we see publicly, but privately, which is a doubt every CEO has, thinking on leadership roundtables, and they're like, okay, we're being pushed to adopt AI for the sake of adopting AI. And they're forced to say our strategy is AI strategy without actually just jumping back and saying, all right, first of all, what is our business strategy? Who are we? What is our identity as a business? And the beliefs we have about the world, are the beliefs still valid with how AI plays out? So first, let's figure out where do we really add value for the customers that we're serving? And the way we're delivering that value, does that get impacted by AI and then have an AI strategy? But I think it's mostly what I'm seeing is we need a faster horse. We now have a faster horse. Let's get rid of the other horses, put this in, and not realizing that the carriage business is gone, right?
Mhm.
But if you are still in the carriage business, there's a world for you. But first, ask yourself, what business are you in? Where do you add value to the customer? And then think about AI. And I think a lot of the narrative that's getting missed right now is on the actual business transformation and value. And we're seeing this live in front of us. We're here today, Monday, after the Super Bowl. So, probably the biggest event that has, even whether you like football or not, who are the way consumer behavior is leading up to this and that event. Look at ads, look at how businesses find value in it. And in there, if you just look at the ads last night, it's a real live case study of how businesses figuring out where their identity is in this space and what do they really stand for in terms of value.
And I think you really are pointing to something really, really important for us. And I would say last 3 years, we have not seen many good examples for us to lean on when businesses have really thought through how I serve my customers going forward. Does it still make sense? Or am I still repeating the same reality that used to be before AI? I stumbled upon a really interesting example, and I'll share this with us here today and maybe we can build. And I'd love to unpack if you have more examples to share. There's this insurance company called Lemonade in the US. I don't know if you've heard about it.
No, I have not.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting case study where this company, so Before we jump into Lemonade, I also wanted to introduce a new terminology which I encountered from an IBM research paper. They now explicitly put companies in two buckets: companies who are trying to be plus AI companies, where they are bolting AI onto their existing systems, and AI plus companies, where you're actually rethinking your entire way of working and operating as a business with AI as the power socket, so to speak, in how you operate your business. And Lemonade seems to be one of those companies. They're an insurance company. Their claim to fame is that they can process claims within 3 seconds using AI. But what I dug out so far was the fact that they started looking at their business model differently. They said, hey, insurance companies, they have conflict of interest. Every time they have to pay out a claim, they don't want to because it's not in their interest, right? But this company said, what if we take that constraint out of the equation and redesign our company? So they went and looked at their business very differently with AI in the mix. That's just one example. Have you started seeing more examples of companies that are rethinking their business model with AI as the turbocharger, for lack of better words for them?
I think there's so I love that term of like, bolting on AI onto whatever you're existingly producing and then saying, hey, in this world, what else? AI is a feature. They added AI as a feature rather than saying, hey, AI is actually a benefit to the value equation. I would say their majority that you're seeing publicly are examples where they're not doing it that right? They're bolting on AI. And of course they have to make like there's an AI theater they have to play to, right? I think the examples that I'm seeing on the ground here are the more AI native companies or companies that have embraced that we need to be AI native, that AI is going to be the way the world is just going to operate. How do we add onto it and see how we can deliver value? And there's few of them like Lemonade. I did not know about Lemonade, so I'll definitely check it out. Clean example would be, I talked about the Super Bowl. So live business case study happening in front of us. You have OpenAI that announced last week whether they're going to introduce ads in ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT is the consumer subscription to it is a major funding mechanism for them. Now they're adding ads to it, right? Which has conflict of interest, like we're talking about insurance business. Anthropic, on the other hand, sent out a bold statement, and then they actually created an ad, which again, thanks to AI, they can do it really fast during the Super Bowl. And in the ad, they're like, there's a space for ads, and we're not that space. We're a space for thinking. So you're seeing two major players in the AI native world who took a completely different identity and said, our identity is we help you think, help you get better at work, and through that process, help you redefine your business as well. But we're not here to sell you ads in this process because we want to keep it sort of like clean. And the other side, you have, no, we are in that business that, over the last 10, 12 years in tech or across the world, we've been in the space of data colonialism, that we get customers in, you get them to use our product, we gather data on them, in there we can sell services to them. And it's the same model, just taking a different format that what Google was doing with Google search. And now you have ChatGPT saying, I have ads in there. Just the ads going to be done very differently because they're now a generative AI ad. Versus Claude saying, no, the longer term business is how you actually perform. We're going to plug into the way people work. Right? So that's like a live case study that probably 10 years later, academics are going to study and say, well, they actually took an identity call in the moment. Other examples I'm seeing is, Zapier is a key example that long before everyone embraced distributed work or remote work during the pandemic, they had already gone remote and distributed probably like a decade ago. And when AI came in, so they were already set in a new way of working. They actually did a code red and said, okay, we are already in the automation space, but AI completely changes it. Like they could have just rested on the laurels and saying, we help you automate your workflows. As more and more people are embracing distributed work, as more gig work is coming up, we can have small businesses compete with bigger businesses by giving them these automations that were generally reserved for bringing consultants in or a major SaaS product. But they did a code red on themselves, right? They said, okay, we need to figure out how AI plus our top talent operates. And while the first pushback came in that, well, what if the AI makes mistakes? They're like, well, what happens when our top talent makes mistakes?
Hmm.
It goes back to our culture. We do make mistakes. We try to avoid irreversible risk, like quoting Jeff Bezos. But if we put AI in and we still keep some guardrails on risk, if this changes the way we work and then change the way we are helping our customers, it is not an AI feature, right? So they could have just said, hey, Zapier automation, right? There's other companies like that as well. But now you have AI that's going to guide you how to do an automation. Like, no, we're going to make AI the agentic way so that you don't even have to worry about understanding Zapier. Just in natural language, chat with it with what you want to create, it will create for you. And you're seeing others now copy that. So I see these, I call these AI native versus AI colonizers, that you have these AI native companies that are new, and then the legacy ones who are trying to embrace becoming AI native. AI colonizers are we're just looking at who's doing well on AI. Either we build it or we just buy them, bring them into our organization, bolt them on, and then their antibodies of their old culture is going to kick in. That's going to basically minimize any value that comes out of these. So I think, and we're seeing more and more of these on the ground, right? Another example is your Shopify. One of Shopify's engineering leader recently presented at a community I was in, and he mentioned that we just set the base expectation that everyone in the company is using AI. So when we evaluate what you produce and what you can produce, what different things you can do, we're assuming that the bar has been raised and that the floor has been raised, that you're using AI for it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is where we're seeing it kick in. But what comes back to me is, in business schools, always two case studies are referenced, right? Like the Kodak example, right? And then you have Blockbuster as an example that Blockbuster did not see what was happening with Netflix. And Blockbuster already had a streaming service at one time, it just did not work. I think imagine if both of them were today, where AI is the new way of working, and then something shifted in the market. Consumer behavior changed that they do not want film, they want to do digital photography. And then with Blockbusters, like, hey, people want to stream. If AI was the way of working for them, they would have been very easy to take off their blinders and figure out where they can pivot and maybe change their business completely and even sell their business, right? And I think that's the play we're seeing shift here with how like AI companies are adopting AI. But majority, if you look at the data, right, that adoption has not worked, and where it has worked, it hasn't seen the returns. Davos just happened a couple of weeks ago, and there was a chart that was referenced in Davos across different meetings, right, that I kept seeing circulated. And one of them was PwC, so PricewaterhouseCoopers, did a survey of CEOs and companies, and they had a very nice chart which told a story that about 12% saw cost reduction and revenue increase because of AI, more than 2%, right? More than 2% of the business in the last 12 months. And I'm like, okay, that is great. But still, they're thinking in short term, in my existing business, there's a cost reduction, there's a revenue increase, it's only 12%. Whereas 56% saw no meaningful change. And I'm like, what's missing in this chart is the discussion on that 56%, because you need a third axis on this chart around capability. Did you actually build new capability while embracing AI that helped you serve different markets, different services, or the way you produce value? So, like Lemonade is a classic example. They're like, we're trying to compete in a heavily regulated, very difficult to enter business like insurance. What can we do? Well, we can change the way we process claims and build trust. So in there, we will create new market that probably was not served by the other insurance companies, right? So I think that third axis is really important, which is where the value creation is going to come in for businesses. So, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like for a company that is just emerging or is relatively new, for them to pivot and become an AI native organization is relatively easier compared to like a big giant corporation that has been in existence for decades and probably sit in your AI colonizer bucket. Is that a fair assessment? And then if this is the case, then I'm really curious to learn from you, Shujat.
what we're talking about is not so like you don't have to be a PhD researcher to land on what we're talking about. Like it seems like that's the logical next thing for us to be thinking about and doing. Why aren't organizations then paying attention to this? Why are they still about solving for efficiency and here and now and short term thinking?
Yeah, it's, incumbents, whenever disruption happens, it's not been great success stories, but incumbents have survived it. But the core factors, when I used to think about disruption and used to work on disruption, was there were like three conditions, right? I used to talk about. The first condition is, are you constantly questioning the assumptions on which you believe the world stands? And if those core assumptions are no longer valid, right, you still have time to act, but you can't if there were two other conditions. One, are you seeing revenue loss happening on customers going away because they're going to a different shift in the market? And are every asset that you hold, that you've invested in, asset could be hardware, software, talent, is that becoming now a liability for you? I think when that happens, it is more often than not too late to change. So, not saying that large companies can't change, the bold ones actually question assumptions, figure out what's happening, and say, all right, we're going to quickly make a shift. It won't be quick, but there's ways to making a shift. Why large companies cannot, right? Because you have already people in roles, you've already set up investments for hardware, you already set up investments for software and talent, and in there, must bunch of approvals and processes and strategic planning has happened to say this is where we're headed. Who actually stands up and says, well, whatever we pitched is no longer valid, whatever I am owning is no longer valid? I think we need a shift in direction. In an environment, we're also hearing that, well, maybe my role is not relevant anymore, doesn't matter what level I'm at, right?
Mhm.
So there's this territorialism. If you think about psychology, there is, humans respond to when there's like a threat to their competency, right? Threat to their affiliation, right, with others, and then threat to like connectedness with others, right? So you are already seeing that if AI is a threat to me, what I can deliver, on top of it, all the plans I laid out, and I built my own organizational strategy based on that, how am I going to go back to the CEO and the board and say, this does not work? In
Mm.
smaller companies, it is easier because they're still used to pivoting, right? They're
Yeah.
nimble. That's why you're seeing in the larger companies this narrative that we need to reduce bureaucracy, we need to get decision making, but they're already so entrenched in the way of working. It is very difficult to now steer the ship, even if like you're on a Titanic and the iceberg's there. So that's why it's difficult. Now, does that mean can they? They still can, but where I've seen historically is there is think of a concept of like a core and an edge, right? That each company has a core that they've established, that's their identity and the way they do business. And edge is the new way of doing it. In this case, would be, being AI native. Generally, what we've seen is where you don't try to get like a edge discovered and try to bring it back to the core. You keep them separate, get the edge to build. And once you realize that this is the new way of going, you bring the entire core to it to avoid the antibodies again. So, right,
Mm.
there are examples where, when Google did Moonshot, that's an example of an edge that they were funding to say, complete different way of working. Can we just rethink what the future would be that would even take us out? They did not manage it well. That's why they had a code red when AI came in and then Perplexity came in. You see acquisitions where, Meta or Facebook took over WhatsApp. For a couple of years, they were kept separate. Think about Microsoft and LinkedIn, they were kept separate intentionally. But eventually, the large company bureaucracy and who owns what power kicks in. You can, if you think of this as a new, brand new identity. The best example I know from the last recession, or at least the one that I studied and I was really, mesmerized by it, not paid by them at all, is Adobe. Right when the last recession happened in 2008, 2009, you were in the business of selling CDs, right? Adobe, every software came through CDs.
Yeah.
And at that time, the SaaS movement was happening that we should not sell CDs, put everything in the cloud. and we will reduce the cost for people. It's a recession environment, easier for CIOs and CFOs to say yes to this model. And they're like, but we just don't want to be in this model. Right? That's a model shift. But if we announce boldly right now, it's not going to happen. So they made an announcement in the heat of the recession. I think it was like $1.8 billion. They said, we're acquiring a company called Omniture, and it's going to have zero synergy value. And I still remember, because I had a clip of it when I was studying this for my own like business strategy. Wall Street Journal, other gurus said they're doing something called web analytics, and it
Mm,
has zero synergy value. This is ridiculous. Your business is tanking. You're trying to move to a SaaS model, and then you made an acquisition that does not make sense.
mhm,
3 years later, entire Adobe business moved to Omniture, which was a we're about, since we know that you're going to use everything in the cloud, we're about analytics, digital marketing, insights. And then Gartner, I think they became the top quadrant for that. Now Wall Street Journal and the group said, oh, we knew this from day one. This is the new space of web analytics, and this is where the future is going to be, right? What they did is they did it very secretly in the sense that their public discussions were about we're moving to SaaS, we're going to change our metrics, we're going to educate Wall Street how you assess us. And they did a whole roadshow through the CEO. And secretly, right, just so that there's not much spotlight on them, they were building everything with Omniture, getting themselves ready, knew now this is time to scale, and then they shifted what their business was. It was no longer that SaaS, like SaaS isn't our identity. It's a way of doing business. Our
mhm.
identity is now we don't just sell you software to create PDFs. We are creative cloud, and in there we give you insights, analytics, and now if you add AI to it, to look at Adobe Premiere Pro and all of that, they are ready for the next thing as well, right? So that
Mm.
is probably the closest example or closest to my heart that I've seen from a large company. The rate of change we're seeing with the smaller companies right now, I think it's just going to be so fast that that's why the AI colonizers are like, let's just buy the AI native
Yeah.
and just catch up, right? But I'm bullish on the smaller companies also from a cultural aspect as well. I think the smaller companies understand that they need to think in a more future work orientation. People want flexibility. We don't want people to come in an inclusive environment. We know top talent also cares about this. They do not want heavily polished, leaders. They want authenticity. They want transparency. They want you to stand for something as well as part of the business and in there and take care of our burnout, right? So that's where I think smaller companies have easier ways to attract talent while also knowing that with AI, they don't need the tons of bodies and cash to scale that a previous business model used to. They can do that while having fewer people, but the right people and build the right culture around it so to sustain. So that's where I am bullish that the smaller companies are going to run rounds around the bigger ones.
I mean, that makes complete sense that innovation will happen on the edges through the outlier ecosystem, and then the big players are going to come and swoop them into their ecosystem. Now, the question then comes to my mind is depending on the big company's organizational culture, will that little acquisition be able to transform the rest of the organization or become part of the calcified organization that it originally was? That'll be an interesting one
Yeah.
to see because some companies might just die out. I have a feeling that this shift that we are seeing, one, it's truly like that movie title, Everything Everywhere All at Once. There's no part of the business that you cannot rethink with AI at your fingertips. But at the same time, the speed at which the company has to pivot, shift, change, adapt, and evolve is so fast that sometimes it outpaces like the human ability to transform and change with the changing times. Like even this small example, we haven't encountered much of it yet, but think about a future state where we should get into what Claude came out with a few days ago. But before that, the example that I frequently use, and I tie it back to the impact on people in the organization, but we don't have to go there today. But I'd love to hear your take of this broadly from impact on the business and how a business functions perspective. Like if tomorrow you and I are not shopping, we have our agents and we configure those agents and we tell them, these are the specs, follow these specs and buy me this particular pair of shoe. at this cost and no more. And I am not shopping now. I have just pushed out my agent who's going to go scrape the entire e-commerce ecosystem and get me the closest match to my specs. I mean, ChatGPT does that, but it's not that great. It is really in infancy stage right now, but it started. So, in that case, now that consumer behavior shift has a profound impact on the anatomy of the organization. Like, look at marketing department; they're all wired to, influence and impact behavior shift in humans. But now here, a machine is shopping, a human is not. So, a best color palette and the punchiest line is not going to attract the machine. That has a big impact on the value that marketing team has to offer to the organizational ecosystem. And then it also has a trickle down effect on, one, what does a marketing team stand for? Two, who do you have in marketing team? What are the ways of working? So everything, it's like a domino effect
Yeah.
that happens with one small shift in how consumers buy products.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I love that you mentioned everything everywhere all at once, because I keep seeing these slides that, back from consulting days, I still see them right now where leaders are being presented to, hey, it's crawl, walk, run. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I don't think it's crawl, walk, run. I think if you see that slide, you should just run away and say, this is everything everywhere all at once. Now, that does not mean you'll put guardrails and you have to be thoughtful. No, you can be thoughtful, but realize that at this point, you have to get multiple low stakes and high stakes experiments going in different areas. And as leaders, you have to put the strategy around, okay, how do we let those experiments happen and have an oversight to see that, hey, where things go wrong, can we sort of put guardrails around it? And it's funny, I'll go back to like Super Bowl yesterday, right? Where one after the other, the ads, you could tell there are companies that have sort of taken the lazy path, and you could tell it's a very perfect ad using AI. And then suddenly an ad comes in where you're like, this character actually looks fake, and they're going out of their way to make you feel like it's fake. And then it came out to be Anthropic saying, this is why ads have their space, but not everywhere, right? And I think there is going to be more value in you not being perfect and it being more wrong that is going to drive it. So that's one. I think that's where we're headed. From a business perspective, to answer you, let me step back on, I think, two things around this. One is a question the business asking, okay, where can we really add new value rather than just optimizing for existing value, and value being what do we deliver to a customer that they feel like willing to pay to us. Either they feel an intrinsic value to us, so they're going to pay us a premium. I think Apple products as an example, or they think we are a commodity, right? So that's where the value is. So one, thinking about where can we create new value and new ways of delivering value rather than just, right, changing and optimizing the value that we were created. So if you're a marketing department that said, hey, we used to do ads and they used to be very expensive to produce and then to negotiate the rates for the Super Bowl, I'm just using Super Bowl
Mhm.
as a lightning rod, like, well, that can be now reduced because we're going to use AI to do it faster. Customers not really going to care. Like, that's kind of the thing. And we can negotiate better because so many people are now doing this. Versus saying, no, can I use AI to come up with something completely different that captures someone's attention, right? And gives them a different value about it. That's one. Second part is the lack of imagination, right?
Mhm.
Or can we open up what's possible here? That Gordon, I really love like the way he explains marketing. And I think it was a couple of months ago, I was watching him and he said something very interesting. He said, people can mistake marketing as a rebrand, right? When a company goes a rebrand, they're like, we'll change the way we do ads, we're going to change the way our campaigns are. Marketing is not just ads. Right? Marketing is whatever you do that makes your customers think, I want to buy more of what they provide. So, as an example, if you're like at a game, they're like someone selling you food during the game is a part of the experience that the overall league, right? It makes their sales better. But when you start nickeling and diming them on that food, right, you've now taken away, right, that opportunity to market for a bigger picture, right? So that is where I think that you'll have two parts. One is what you just said, AI bolted on. I'm thinking about marketing as, hey, we used to do ads. Can we change the value chain of ads? What are the agencies we use? What do we produce? What do we negotiate? Or say, do I even need an ad in the first place? Maybe there's an existing creator. That's why you're seeing founders be creators, right? I'm embracing that as well, that you
Mhm.
actually put your voice out there, give something authentic. And if that automatically drives followership and people want to buy that what you're selling, great, right? I think that those are the two ways, and you can use AI for that. And that applies to any business, like not just marketing, sales. You can use AI right now to do sales. I had one, I was blown away. Someone reached out. They had looked at my website. So I could tell that they've used AI right now. It done a less than 1 minute video, Loom video of my website scroll
Yeah.
and given me an offer. They said, hey, if this doesn't work out, we'll pay you. Do you want to get on a call? And by the way, before you get on a call, here is my AI agent that will do an initial call with you so you have an idea, are we legit or not? Like, I'm fascinated. Give them my number, get a call from that same CEO. It's their voice avatar. Felt like he is talking to me, but the kind of questions he was asking, and I pushed the AI to see, is this just generic or not? They actually went into more depth with me. And I'm like, okay, now I'm intrigued. I actually want to chat with this person. What is it that they really want to chat? On the flip side, I see so many people just using automated messages, voice agents that seem so robotic and generic. They're not even personalized. Whereas this person, they're like, I'm a new business. I'm going to use that same technology to get more personalized, get you intrigued, get you into a conversation. And even in that conversation, for you to trust what I'm going to offer, even my AI is more thoughtful than the generic AIs, right?
Mhm.
I think that is the way the more imaginative, forward thinking business transformation leaders are going to think about, okay, where do I add value? Where else can I add value? And I'll wrap this up with, there's used to be the innovation matrix, right? Which is like on one axis, it's like, where do you play, right? In the market. And are there new markets and services that you can create? And the other axis is like how you play, which is how you provide that service. And the more you get good on this, you're going to open up new market. I think this is where the business transformation starts with asking, okay, what's our identity in these markets, which are the core versus the edges that are on the outside? Can we actually have an identity in the edges right now? And that is driven because we're embracing AI to get there, to create new value,
Yeah.
right? I think that is those who are straddling both the current world and the new world. That's a question that the real business transformation leaders are going to ask. And that is right now where I'm seeing missing, and naturally missing again, fear of jobs, fear of your identity, fear of like who's going to come up and say to the CEO that this does not work, who's going to go into a quarterly business review and say, hey, everything we presented last quarter, everything that you presented to the entire company in your leadership summit is actually pointless.
Yeah.
People are not going to do that.
Unless the performance metrics of an organizational ecosystem changes, where a CEO really values somebody coming to the table and saying, this worked 6 months ago, but this is not going to work from 6 months from now, so I am proposing a change. If a CEO or the C suite leadership starts valuing those inputs, I think then they can incentivize the behavior change within all layers of the organization. Because I also feel, Shujat, to your earlier point, that when a business has to think about reorienting itself towards how they think about creating value in this new evolving ecosystem, the same mindset has to trickle to all levels of the organization. It's not just the CEO who are thinking about where should we play and where should we not play, or the C suite, but also every capability leader in the organization has to think about how do they think about their value to the rest of the organization in service of the greater value that we are thinking about offering.
And this is for your audience comes from different backgrounds as well. And I think it's good that we're talking about business strategy, because I think business strategy is often missing in the discussion, especially in the HR audience, especially in like even marketing communications as well. And I keep going back to the definition of value, right? value is it's in a industry or the business you're in, is that what is the value that you offer in the market and the value that others offer in the market. And if you are taken out of that equation, does the overall value in that market, in that business, in that industry drop? If it does not, that means you're sort of augmentation. You're another player in this market, right? And I use that equation to part of my career to even coach others, even in HR as well, saying if you are, for example, an HR business partner, if you are a product marketing leader, say that this is the value that the business gets from what you provide as a function. Now put in your and so many other roles that we see in companies, right? That they're overlapping roles with sort of redundant scopes and charters. I'm like, put all of them together and say if you're taken out, does the value change for why the business uses you as a function? So I remember in people analytics, I used to ask that a lot of people analytics are very smart, strategic folks brought in, but then a lot of the time HR doesn't use them to proper value, so they become staff augmentation. They make
Yeah.
others look good who may not be necessarily doing well in their job, right? Let's not everyone, but that's how the equation is. And I used to ask my team as well, and even in our leadership offsites, that okay, if we take ourselves out, what is the value missing? And is the value missing that, oh, they're better at stakeholder management, they're better at analysis? I'm like, all of that, everyone should be doing it in their roles. So if our role is that we make others look better when they go and talk to the business, then our role is just staff augmentation. Apply that to every role, right? Marketing, sales, engineering, product, because that's the same way business, the CEO is going to be looking at it as well. And I think that is where you say, all right, if I do something very unique with the way AI is, either as an individual in my career offering services to a company or to a bunch of companies, or I am an overall business as a founder, I'm looking at this is the value I provide in this industry. And in that equation, if you realize that if you're taken out and the value doesn't change much for the end customer, you're fooling yourself, right? You have to see that at what point does it matter to the end customer, the buyer of my service, where that value is. And then you'll know this is what I'm offering. This is how I can offer it better than others. I can reduce this for them. I can reduce their effort, get them to the same outcome. And then you'll know, okay, what features do I need to bring in? What technology do I need to bring in? What people do I need to bring in? To your point, it all comes back to whoever is the leader there, have they set the culture in their mind? Have they set the right performance metrics saying, this is what I value, this is what I need you all to help me build this, so that
Mhm.
we can constantly see that we are valuable, so that all of you stay valuable to me as the founder and the leader of the company.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm also curious, you also mentioned the example that you gave some time ago about, the podcast person reaching out to you with how they leveraged AI to do what any other person would be doing, but differently. So I'm curious, are you feeling or sensing that the future of organizational structures is going to be flatter than what we are seeing? Because this one person could do the job of, like probably a team and still give you that experience that got you intrigued so that you're ready to have a call with them. I'm sure they're not a 300 people team trying to kludge together different parts of the workflow to get you in as a lead. So, is the future of organizations flatter? And two, which organizational capabilities do you see are facing the maximum existential threat if they don't course correct very soon?
Yeah, I definitely think it's flatter if you're seeing the cues from the legacy tech now, I'll call it, but like even the bigger players in AI, look at all the layoffs that have been happening. Although there's many reasons and scapegoating for how why those layoffs are happening, because they had to do cost cutting anyways. The macroeconomic factors are such, tariffs were happening. But in there's a common theme that you hear is that the need to reduce bureaucracy so that they can get to faster decision making. So
Yeah.
you're going to see flatter structures. Now, ironically, they're doing it by expanding the span and control of the existing leaders. It's going to set them out. So I think they're it's like a vicious cycle. They're going to shoot themselves in the foot. The flatter structures have been already embraced by new players. So let's take, Gamma is the amazing AI tool that is, competing with, PowerPoints of the world and Canva.
Yeah.
And Gamma's CEO, what I like is publicly sharing on his LinkedIn as well, how is he designing the org and where the value has been. I think he shared a couple of months ago that he's like, stop telling me that you can't hire entry level. I got entry level folks in, but it was their mindset, their capability that, hey, we're going to be a Swiss Army knife. As we're building this, if we need to learn a new domain, we will go use AI to learn it. We'll use AI to also execute it. Right? And from there, they're building their skill set. And that is the capability that we're seeing. And he shared some numbers. I think at his valuation, they were expected to have like 200, 250 people at least in his company. And I think he hardly has 1/10 of it because it is bunch of Swiss Army knives that he's gathered who are building new capability in the company by building their own capability. And so I think it reflects few things. One, as the leader, who got pushed back for funding saying you can't build this. You're competing with, the Goliaths of the world in this, right? And he's like, no, I'm going to build it. So first that conviction, and then the capability saying that we're going to bring people in, let them build this, but let them say use AI. So the natural reaction is that I need to add more bodies to it, build that capability. And from there, we will stay ahead of the game rather than just some very fixed things we decided at the start of the year that we're going to build this and we're not going to change our plan. The autonomy given to people, and then the recognition that he's publicly giving, which sends back a signal to the employees saying, you know what? This is what this person values, and these are what his values are as well, right? And if I go back to the pre-AI world, or pre-AI world, like pre-like AI hype world, when I used to advise leaders, including even our own like HR team, but beyond that, like business leaders, there's this concept of a requisite organization. It's a decades old paper in management. Basically says that the higher up level that you add, the person above you should be because there's an additional capability that they have. But what companies, if you don't add based on capability and you're adding because of reduced capacity, then you're just adding layers who are coordinator of other resources, which in some businesses and some functions may work well, but they're like, but that's not going to be long-term career. It was very difficult for management and HR to actually deploy this. So, but I've loved that. It's such an old paper. And what that means is, for instance, layoffs are happening. And let's take recruiting as an example, which is very similar to sales as well. Said, hey, the volume of the business is now dropping. So the number of people we had either in sales or recruiters, if the volume is going down, we are going to just have fewer recruiters. And the few talent acquisition leaders I used to advise, and the sales leaders, I'm like, when the volume is going up, humans have a lot of ability to stretch their capacity. Like how I've led teams is that I've gotten the team's trust and said, just give me extra months of prep. If we manage this high volume, but also build the capability that we put systems on it that builds your capability to manage this. Naturally, you're no longer an individual contributor. You're not thinking in systems. That's good for your future career as well. And we're able to figure out a way that we don't need to hire that many bodies to a problem. We get this right, then we're going to add the right bodies with the right capabilities to manage this new system. And when the volume goes down, we're already have hedged ourselves against it. But what happened is volume is going up, hire more recruiters, and then hire
Yeah.
more recruiters to hire recruiters. Sales, hire more sales development reps, hire more sales enablement. Volume goes down. Hey, we don't have enough book of business. We're going to bring it down. If you already were thinking in systems, you could have managed the ups and the downs. So I think that capability of saying that if someone comes to you and says, we need to add more heads, we're going to add more resources, right? If it's on human, like first, what capability are we building? What capability do we need? It's an opportunity to stretch ourselves and then bring people in who either have built that capability internally or already have it outside. So make it a capability play, not just a capacity play. And if you're playing the capacity situation thing is at some point in time, the music's going to stop, right?
Yeah. I
That
love the example that you shared, and it's such a beautiful segue into part two of our conversation, which is all about capability, especially looked at through the lens of technology that is at our disposal. So, with that, Shujat, I'll say we pause our conversation on the business aspect of AI transformation today. And then when we continue our conversation next time, we will zoom into how AI is actually disrupting the capability, organizational capability landscape with the technology lens on.
Oh, absolutely. Look forward to. Thank you. This was a great discussion. I always love like exchanging ideas with you.
Yeah, love it too. I learned so much through our conversation today. So thank you so much for your time.